I now live on a street with somebody who manages or works with Paul McCartney, so I'm hoping one day he might hear that cover. Probably the most famous Hot Chip song, that was from our second album, The Warning. What I remember about writing that with Joe and Felix was being in this former church in Camden where Felix and Joe lived together, and that was turned into a kind of block of flats, so not a conventional recording studio. And we were just jamming on a kind of, I guess, a percussive groove that Joe had made. Felix was adding sort of distorted, offbeat bass line, which is like the main bass line in the song. And I was adding some guitar. I was trying to kind of make something that sounded like Accelerator by Royal Trucks, which was one of my favourite albums at the time and still is, which is a very kind of overdriven and in the red sounding record. It's very exciting sounding, and I wanted to get something like that into this quite disco-y, wonky groove that Joe had created. And the words were talking about what I was hearing in the music, so they were talking about, when I talk about the joy of repetition, it's kind of referencing the love that Joe has for making a great rhythm track or a great kind of groove or a song. Whilst I was singing directly about what I was hearing and that love and that joy in repetition, I was also, I knew that I was quoting a song by Prince called Joy in Repetition. There's this idea of the joy of repetition really being in you like a monkey with a miniature cymbal that play percussion, that kind of walk around on your table or something, and they're like banging cymbals together. I think that had come into my head because there's a Royal Trucks album called Hand of Glory where they listed all the players on it, and it said what Neil Haggerty had done, what Jennifer Herriman had done, and then it just had a toy monkey with cymbals as one of the instrumentalists on it, and it just was a nice phrase, so it kind of came into my head when trying to describe that incessant passion for rhythmic and repetitive music. The next song I would talk about is Dying in Heaven, which was the first song on my latest record, Silence. That was something which originally I wrote it during the kind of UK lockdown at the beginning of the pandemic. I suppose I was talking about what was going on that was affecting everybody at that time, which was you were in isolation and unable to see people freely other than family, I suppose. And you were also, everyone was responding to the George Floyd murder, and the protests were beginning. The Black Lives Matter process related specifically to that at that time were beginning, and it was just very sad and powerful time in terms of people taking action, and very sad in terms of what happened to him and the kind of inherent racism behind it. And I was trying to work out what you can do when you're not meant to be getting together with people en masse because of the pandemic, and yet you need to in order to protest about something. So the song was about that tension really, and also about how people treat each other and how brutal humans can be towards each other. And I suppose I was imagining somebody who's passed away looking down from heaven, if that's where they were, and I was imagining them looking down and trying to make sense of the kind of brutality on Earth, which makes it sound like an incredibly miserable song, but I don't think it is. I think it's just connecting to those topics and trying to say something more optimistic about how we could behave. And There Was a Boy from School. That was something which I wrote on this Casio keyboard in Joe's brother's room at Joe's house. I think we were working on another song and we just had a break from it, and I went into the other room, which was Joe's brother Jazz's room, and sat on my own and wrote what was really quite a kind of mournful song in waltz time on this Casio, and I think it sounded a bit like Robert Wyatt's 1980s records to me, and it was channeling some memories and nostalgia for being at school with Joe's brother Jazz and with Joe, and talking through some relationship I'd been in when I was younger, and just kind of making sense of that. I then brought that sad ballad into the room and played it to Joe, and he instantly liked it but said we could make this a disco song. We built it up quickly as a disco song, and it worked for us to change it from where it had started into this other thing. So that was a good kind of moment of working together quickly to transform something into the song that you hear. Another song I recorded with Hot Chip was called White Wine and Fried Chicken. That was one where it's funny how the song turned out, because I think it sounds a bit like a kind of a country soul song or something, and somebody said it was quite yacht rock when I played it live not so long ago. But I was trying to get at something a bit like a D'Angelo or Prince melodically and lyrically, and I've never eaten fried chicken whilst drinking white wine, so it's more of a fantasy. But that was one of those kind of memorable lines that came to me, and I felt like it was worth pursuing that and like turning it into a song. And I remember we had a session booked at a residential studio, Angelic, with Mark Ralph working with us, the producer, and I had only written the opening verse and chords to the song, and I remember just sitting on the train and trying to write the rest of it on the way to the studio so that we'd actually have a song to record by the time we got there. Sometimes the pressure of having to write quickly means that you do actually finish a song quite quickly, and I was really pleased with how that one turned out. Soon after making it, I became vegetarian. Now I'm vegan, so I never really sing about fried chicken anymore. I've changed it to seitan, which is a substitute for chicken. So that's a little bit of a fact for you there about how the song's progressed. So there's a song by Paul McCartney called Coming Up, which I covered on my first solo record, Rubbed Out. And Paul McCartney's version was from his album McCartney 2 from 1980. He made that record, I believe, entirely on his own, playing everything himself. I was very inspired by the sound of McCartney 2 when I was making my first album. I didn't try and copy the sound, but I was inspired by that approach of doing everything yourself. And I think that I was just loving Temporary Secretary, Coming Up, Check My Machine, various things from that McCartney album at the time. And I like to cover things and make them different from the original if I can. So that cover it came to me very naturally. I just played it on an electric guitar through a small transistor amp, and it kind of distorted nicely through that amp, and it reminded me a little bit of the guitar sound you get on the Superwolf album by Matt Sweeney and Bonnie Prince Billy, which was something else I was listening to at the time. So my cover was really just a misremembering of the Paul McCartney song. I didn't sit down and work out the exact chords and give it all of the arrangement that his song has, but it's got the melody and the essence of the song is there. And I remember that was also one of the very first songs I played in solo concerts around that time, so I've got fond memories of covering that. I now live on a street with somebody who manages or works with Paul McCartney, so I'm hoping one day he might hear that cover. House of the Truth is a song that's just come out on my album Silence, but I wrote it in the context of Hot Chip sessions. So I think it was when we were making Why Make Sense, and it was really a kind of Moody Man influenced up-tempo house song. It had a nice sample in it that we then couldn't clear, which was quite integral to the song. And eventually that song just kind of fell by the wayside, and I still really believed in it. It didn't make it onto that record, and we played it live sometimes with Hot Chip, but it never could kind of find its feet as a Hot Chip song. And I think that's sometimes to do with how other people feel about a track. But for me, I really believed in it, and lots of friends of mine would say to me, whatever happened to that song? That was one of my favourite songs when you played it live. I think that's one of your best songs. Really confused by it kind of disappearing. And so over a period of years, I would just play it solo in solo gigs of mine at the piano, or have a drum machine running and play it in a more kind of housey way. And eventually I chose to record it for this album and just take it away from that original place. And it's kind of related to house music in a sense, in terms of some of the rhythms that happen in the choruses on the piano, but it doesn't sound like a house record at all. It's more like a slow kind of building gospel track or something. So yeah, that's the strange kind of long evolution of the writing of that song. Am I Not a Soldier, which was on my second solo record, Awake Barbarians. That came to me really quickly in my sort of home studio. I remember just playing in a kind of, you know, non-quantized, just playing in a nice drum machine pattern on this old thing I've got. It's called the Kit by MPC, but it's not the Akai MPC. It's a early 80s British drum machine. And I just played that through a delay pedal and made a beat that really felt kind of quite hip-hop inspired, but it had a kind of a different feel to it because of the delay pedal it was going through, and the song just fit nicely over that beat. So in a matter of minutes the song was written and recorded with just guitar, that drum machine, and vocals and a little bit of mellotron. And that was a song that was about my relationship to Hot Chip, really. It was about the fact that we'd started as a duo and now we were 5 people, and the dynamics were changing within the band. And I felt at the time like everything I was doing solo away from the band might mean that I was jeopardizing the working relationship in the band, because I was just spending a lot of time on this solo music, and I wanted to write a song that talked about the fear of that relationship being changed and say how important the relationship with Joe and with the others is. And the song was from that very heartfelt place of saying I want to still continue to be friends with these people and make music with these people, and it's really about that. So it's about fighting for that and recognizing that I'm not really somebody who is a fighter, and my name Alexis apparently means defender, so that's what the chorus is about. So it's about that sort of tension between being somebody who needs to defend something and saying, but I'm not a soldier, I'm not somebody who usually fights. So Now There Is Nothing is a song that I recorded with Hot Chip. That's one that came to me, the melody came to me in a dream. So I woke up in the morning with the sort of opening melody of the song, and I went straight into the music studio room I have at home, or used to have at the house I used to live at, and tried to figure out what the right chords would be to go under that melody. And I got the first 2 and I sang the melody, and then with the 3rd chord I kind of accidentally went somewhere that I wasn't intending to go to, and that changed the key, and it sounded nice to me. It sounded like the melody was carrying on going, but the song was modulating to a new key quite unexpectedly. So I felt excited by that musically straight away, and also I liked the fact that the idea had come to me while I was sleeping, so I was kind of interested in following it through and seeing where it could go, and I didn't exactly know where it was going to take me. The opening lines were partly inspired by my bandmate Rob Smelton from Hot Chip, whose brother passed away while we were on tour in Brazil. We got this tragic news, and from kind of talking to Rob about that, I think it must have gone in subconsciously, and I started just thinking about what that would have been like for him. So the song begins talking about that, and then it goes on to talk about different things that were happening to me at that point in time. So my daughter was very young. There are certain lyrics about her waking in the middle of the night, and it's a song kind of related to dreams and related to people losing somebody, whether it's a temporary loss, like a child waking in the night and wanting to know where their parents are, or a more kind of the loss of a partner if you break up with them, or the loss of a brother. It sounds like it's a sad song from what I've just said, but it's quite an optimistic song trying to make sense of all of those different things and loss. Playboy. Joe wrote most of he wrote the chorus words to this song about driving around Putney with the top down in a Peugeot. I think it was his way of pointing out to people that we know it's a bit ridiculous to be the people that we are, liking hip hop a lot. We know that we're not from Compton or somewhere, and we're not Dr. Dre, and we're, at the time recording our songs, Southwest London. So quite a big gap between our inspirations and where where we're kind of coming from, but we were still wanting to make something that we were really into. It wasn't meant with irony, it was just drawing attention to that gap. And I remember watching the video to Cry Me a River by Justin Timberlake. I must have watched that with Joe one evening at his parents' house, and we were both very inspired by how good that record was, and we went straight upstairs to his room and recorded Playboy immediately afterwards, but using the equipment we had. So we didn't have a full studio, we didn't have great equipment compared to what they would have used, but we just had a little Casio. We kind of put that song together very quickly, and it went on to be one of the more popular tracks of ours at that early stage in our career. Beating, and that's from the Mexico EP, which was the very first EP that Joe and I released before we'd started working with Al, Felix and Owen in the band. Must have come out in about 2001. I was at university at the time, and I was very excited that a CD of Hot Chips was being released at all, even though it was a tiny, tiny label, Victory Garden Records. They were very supportive of what we were doing, and this CD arrived, the finished copy, and it was a very proud moment. The song Beating itself, I think I wrote while still at school on an acoustic guitar. I would always tune that guitar down one full tone, and I played that for every solo gig I did before I was doing stuff with Hot Chip, and then I played it on that Mexico EP and everything at the early days of working with Joe on Hot Chip. I think I was listening to lots of Tim and Jeff Buckley at the time and Elliott Smith, so it has a bit of that sound or that atmosphere. And quite soon after that, Joe and I moved away from that more acoustic sound and to something a bit more pop, dance and kind of R&B influenced. There's a new song called Melting Away on my latest album, Silence. The origins of that song go back to when I first met Al from Hot Chip, just after I finished at university back in 2002. And Felix from Hot Chip had been at the same university as me in Cambridge, and he knew Al there, but I'd never met Al. But they talked fondly of this time that they went to a kind of jazz concert in Cambridge with Al's two uncles, Albert and Alex. Those uncles would talk about how they were melting away after each song. And they've got a nice Leeds accent, which I won't try and imitate. But they were melting away after every song. They were just in awe of what this guitarist was doing and how brilliant the concert was. And I would hear Felix and Al refer to this story a lot. So I started writing a song using Melting Away as a kind of chorus back in 2002, I think. And I never got further than the chorus. And then 20 odd years later, I wrote the rest of the song, and I tried to not base it on that jazz concert that they went to, which I didn't experience myself, but I tried to base it on why it was that the music of Washington Phillips is so powerful and why I like it so much. So the song talks about the power of gospel and the power of gospel in music, and I'm a non-religious person listening to those records of Washington Phillips and just being amazed by them and absolutely loving them and thinking they're the most beautiful records I've ever heard. So I was trying to talk about how that can be, and if Jesus doesn't exist for me, he did exist for some people in terms of their belief, and it had an impact on their music making. So just trying to understand all of that.
Radio